Hi, my name is Kevin. I'm an entrepreneur and author, and I'm also an outlier.
Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And we're excited to have you on the show for a few different reasons. You come highly recommended by one of our good friends. We've obviously seen your background, what you're working on, what the book that you have, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So let's dive right into this. Before we kind of talk about the book and your experience, let's paint the picture for our audience real quick. Where are you calling us from right now?
I'm calling from Chicago, actually.
Why Chicago? What are you doing there?
So it's really interesting. So I've been an entrepreneur on and off for most of my career. And I guess starting about last year, I started to work on a book called The Outlier Approach. And it's really funny because when you guys reached out to me, I was like, okay, I'm so excited to be on this show because my book is all about outliering.
Uh-huh.
And the subtitle is How to Strengthen Your Career as a Nonconformist. And as I started writing this book, I realized my perspective on business was very different. It was pretty much the world that's traveled all the time, and I had some big failures and big successes using that strategy. And I started submitting some of my pieces to, CNBC, Forbes, Huffington Post. They all ended up getting published, and then Inc. column started to gave me my own column called, the Nonconformist Way of Business. And that, became really interesting. And based off of that, I was getting a lot of companies and CEOs reaching out to me for branding advice or even like ghostwriting or sales and marketing advice. So I ended up quitting my corporate job. I was actually a chief sales officer for a subsidiary of a publicly traded company. And, so I decided to resign from that position and possibly focus more on my advising and consulting role while I was working towards my MBA at the University of Chicago.
And so that's why Chicago. That's why this time of year, Chicago's a great place, right? What with your experience, and I know you've only been there for a little while. What's the entrepreneurial vibe there? What are the pros and cons of maybe doing business out of Chicago?
That's a really good question, Ever. So I looked into cities like San Francisco. I mean, I've worked there for so long. LA, I've worked there, I lived there for, 15, 17 years and whatnot. I wanted to go into a market that was a little bit different, possibly underdeveloped and whatnot, because the way I saw it was money is money. But if I can kind of catch the wave of the entrepreneurial scene kind of going on its uptrend at Chicago, I wanted to really ride that wave. And University of Chicago was recently named one of the top accelerators in the country. So their new venture challenge is number one, in recent rankings when some of the articles were published on Forbes. It was actually ranked higher than Stanford's program and right at the notch of Y Combinator and 500 startups and whatnot. So, coming to Chicago really appealed to me in that sense.
So what's the long-term goal as far as living there? Once you're done with the program, you're out, or what's it going to look like?
So a lot of people come to, to join an MBA program to kind of, rebrand themselves and go to consulting or finance and whatnot. I have an interesting background in which I started off as a trader in Wall Street. Then I segued into working in Silicon Valley, built my startup up to a $15 million valuation. And then I actually got fired from my own startup. I'd love to share with that in just a second. And then I actually still got the credit for building the company. So that's how I landed a corporate gig for a movie company in Hollywood. But long-term wise, I'm having a lot of satisfaction advising CEOs and promising startups that are ready to take the next level. So what's been happening recently is that I'm advising for CEOs that have built their companies to at least $20-30 million valuations. Two of my clients that I'm working with, they've already exited at $50 million or more in terms of their valuations. and they've done all the conformist approach or, all of this kind of like within the box type of way to building their business. And they're reading my articles. They're like, hey, what's the next level? What's the next thing that I need to do to build a company to potentially 9 figures or 10 figures? And I find a lot of satisfaction working with these CEOs to kind of help them brand or figuring out sales strategies for them to take on the next level. And, as I'm helping them, I'm learning a lot about myself. And, I'm finding a lot of pleasure sharing my ideas and looking at business from a completely different perspective.
I want to get to the book here in just a minute, but I still want to work backwards a little bit. When we were introduced to you, right, I saw the book, researched it a little bit, looked at the history of the work that you've done. At first, I was a little skeptical, thinking, man, this guy's a young guy, right? He might be full of hype and all that stuff, because we get a lot of those pitches, right? We have 400 plus episodes, so we get people approaching us all the time. But you're the real deal. I mean, you've won big and you've lost a few as well, and now you're in a great position. So let's take it back and talk about your very first company, the very first win, and then where it kind of went sideways a little bit.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. I am 33, but I look like I'm 22. I'm not a big guy. I'm 5'7" max. I'm a small guy. And, people are just like scratching their head, like, why is this guy, on stage and speaking? And why is this guy writing for Forbes, CNBC? But it all started when I moved from Korea when I was 16. And, my parents and I differed greatly. So I did have a brief stint living in Minnesota 1 to 9, but my parents mostly spoke Korean at home. So when I came back when I was 16, I spoke broken English. I had this really funny Minnesota accent. My dad and I, people are like, I'm like a dark skinned Korean too. So they're just like, what up, man? Like, you have big eyes, like you don't look Korean. What's going on here? So what was so interesting was that my dad actually quit his amazing job so my brother and I can have this great future. But he looked at America as like, okay, we need to have you guys get an American education. Mm-hmm. But I wanted the American dream. And those are completely two different things. And coming from an Asian family, we had a lot of disagreements. So when I entered college, 2 months in, I dropped out to join a network marketing business. And at this time, my English was really bad that I couldn't pass the English written exam requirement that I actually failed. So, but despite speaking broken English, I started making $10,000 a month selling, outdated beepers, refurbished cell phones. This is circa 2003 or 4. This is when cell phones were starting to get really smart. Mm-hmm. So we would, go, to underserved neighborhoods or pick college students and pitch them on, these refurbished cell phones and whatnot. And I started to make about $10,000 a month. And then I was signing up so many students in my dorm that professors and faculty started sending out emails telling students like, don't skip classes to take meetings with Kevin's team. It got and everyone was just like, man, this guy can't even speak English. And he's doing so well at sales. Well, I kind of did some research as I was writing my book. And there's this, I guess, Professor Dr. Albert Morabian from UCLA. He has this awesome study on body language. So I'm sure a lot of people, kind of heard it, from some kind of media outlet that 90% of communication is body language. And yeah, it turns out what you say is only 7%. So I knew I couldn't change my accent overnight or the funny way I spoke English. So I just kind of like owned it. And I would even flip the script and say, hey, my English is bad and yours is better. You'd probably make more than 10,000 than me. So I just almost reverse engineered the sales pitch in my favor. And that's when I kind of realized, wow, I could actually become an entrepreneur because I wanted to be a history teacher before that. So it was I guess like a big change for me when that happened and the realization that was really exciting.
I love that it's the true American dream, the American story, right? I mean, here you are, broken English, young, you're hungry, you're hustling, and you're making it, right? I mean, so many of us kind of sit here, able-bodied, right, smart enough, whatever, and still we kind of blame circumstances or the world or whatever, right? We come up with different excuses as to why we're not succeeding or why we shouldn't get off the couch to at least put a good fight into this. But here you are, you're making it happen, right? You had a lot of good excuses not to, to sit in the classroom or to like get a regular 9-to-5 job that pays minimum wage. But no, you decided to go do it yourself. And obviously at an early age, you saw a lot of success. Congratulations. That's very inspiring.
No, thank you. And kind of, touching on that point, I realized when I first came to this country, or came back the second time, people didn't want to talk to me as much because it's just very hard to listen. So I never thought my English would improve until I really focused on fixing my accent. And I would watch Friends over and over again, record the way I spoke. And your tongue is like a muscle. You just have to exercise it to get rid of your accent. And the way you think, you have to start thinking in English. Because I used to get so mad when my dreams were in Korean, and I would purposely watch Friends right before I went to bed, hoping I could speak or I could dream in English. So the next day I would think in English. And that's when my language skills started to get really good. And it wasn't, in fact, until 21, until my college roommate of 4 years, came up to me and said, "Wow, your English is so great. You finally sound like an American." I actually went to my room and cried secretively, because it was just such a huge personal accomplishment. And I never thought I'd become a great entrepreneur until I became fully assimilated. And that was kind of like my top goal during my earlier days.
And now you're seeing the success from all that hard work. So like let's move forward a little bit. You're doing the 10,000 a month, right? Doing this selling in some of these low income locations. You start to get more experience, a little bit more exposure, a little bit more confidence, and then what happens after that?
So about 6 months in, this is the craziest story ever. I went on a business trip in Las Vegas, and I was doing well. I was the number 3 regional director of California. I thought I'd never go back to school. And some random person came to my parents' house where my car was parked, put gasoline in my car, burnt it down to the ground. So if you come to my parents' house, you'll see burnt rubber tire marks in front of my parents' house. So at that time, my parents started freaking out. They started getting traumatized, thinking it was related to my business. And it turned out it was just a random act of violence that occurred, and this person vandalized 5 other cars that weekend. And I kind of came to this epiphany, like watching my parents like so sad. I'm like, well, maybe I should finish college. And I decided to go back to school, and I majored in finance. And then I did pretty well. I got really into it because, finance was very similar to poker. And when I'm talking about finance, I'm talking more specifically about trading. So my first gig was a retail stockbroker at E-Trade during the Great Recession. And that was a great experience because this was when Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Lehman Brothers are all collapsing. And, I was taking calls, older people twice my age, literally crying on the phone as their savings accounts were getting wiped out. So it was a fascinating experience to kind of go through that, as a stockbroker during that time.
And so were you loving it? I mean, were you thinking at the time, hey, this is my career, this is what I'm doing until I retire?
I kind of thought about it that way. And it was a very humbling experience. I just saw money come and go so quickly. And when I joined my corporate job, I realized something really interesting. Everyone hated their bosses. It was so crazy. Like, I didn't understand, like, why does everyone hate their boss? And for me, I thought that was a great opportunity, because if everyone hates their boss, that means I'm the only one that needs to like him for me to get promoted. Mm-hmm. So I remember, one of the senior managers saying, "Hey, it's going to take you 2 years to become a high net worth trader." And that only took me 6 months because, they asked me to work overtime. And, one time I worked 23 days in a row. And my nickname became OT Kevin, meaning overtime Kevin. and I always, weren't scared to ask random questions. So I would ask, random questions. I would kind of sometimes question authority, and they kind of give me a pass, because I'm from California and like I'm just like random Korean guy. They'd also call me Rookie Kevin for my random remarks. So it was, it was a great time for me. And I think that's a good lesson for any entrepreneur. Whether you're starting a business or in a company, someone is your boss. Like, you should never forget that. Whether you have investors or clients, if you're an entrepreneur, your clients are your boss. or your investors are your boss. So I think people nowadays underestimate the values of working at a corporation, and it's not too bad. It's, wherever you go, you just do your best, and things will always work out for you.
Agreed. It's what you put in for sure. It's a mindset for the most part. But there is a fire in a lot of us, and we want to do our own thing. We want to be passionate about the work that we do, and sometimes it calls us, and sometimes it doesn't. For you, throughout your career, it's kind of felt like that calling has always been there for you to be an entrepreneur, to do your own thing. You're obviously a little bit of the black sheep. You're a little bit of the outlier, right? The nonconformist. As we start to lead up into the book, tell us about your stint at running that company, your own company, for a while.
Yeah, no, that was a fascinating experience. So what ended up happening was that, when I was working in finance, I ended up saving a lot of money. I was, trading in my personal account and whatnot. I've saved some money, and then with a couple of friends and we launched a company called Dealflicks. Dealflicks was like a price lamp, but for movie deals. And the trouble of launching a company such as Dealflicks is that it's a B2B2C type of business.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to partner with the movie theaters, then you have to get customers. So you're fighting two battles. You're not just getting users. You're not just selling, software to businesses. You got to do both. So you're fighting for the same, I guess like same fund, same pool of money in Silicon Valley, but then you have to spread it out. So our strategy was, okay, we kind of have to use the field of dreams approach, where you build it and they will come. And our goal was to use Dealflicks as a platform and say, hey, we have a ton of inventory, and sign up more theaters, and then get the users to come later. So as we started to do sales, we realized the movie industry is very old school. So we ended up hiring about 20 senior executives. Some of them worked at like AMC, Regal, Sony Pictures and whatnot. And the sales process was so excruciatingly slow. And a lot of it had to do with that. A lot of these business relationships are kind of like legacy relationships. Like, it's been passed down to one generation to the next. Like Coca-Cola has been doing business with, let's say AMC for like decades. And
it kind of feels like the good old boys, right? You're trying to break into something that's been so strong and so established for a long time.
Yes, exactly. And everything had to be done wine and dine. So after we signed up 100 theaters, I actually did some data analysis on this. And none of the theaters that only one theater signed up after just doing a cold call out of 99. And all 99 theaters had some kind of face-to-face interaction. And I was like, we need to step up our game and then drive around the country, or we need to like meet every single movie theater across the country, especially the mom and pops, and sign them up. And at that time, my business partners, Sean and Zach, were just like, then what are you going to do? Like, how are we going to afford this? You got to like fly out, rent a car, drive out to the boonies to, meet these independents, treat them out to steak a couple nights. It's going to cost us an arm and a leg. And then I said, well, I already talked to my mom, and, I was able to fit in a full-size mattress after taking out the middle seats. And then they're just like looking at me. They're just like cracking up. They just thought, okay, Kevin's just being funny. And then I was like very serious, and I kind of gave them like, a data-driven reason why we're doing this. And they just started getting really angry. They're just like, we're running out of cash in like 3 months. And you just think it's funny. You're only going to last in a van for 2 weeks. And you might be able to last in a van, but how about our, first employee / we used to call him junior co-founder, Evan? Like, where's Evan going to sleep? He's like, and I was like, oh, he's going to sleep right next to me. We're going to sleep side by side vertically in this van. Nice. Right. And so we set off, and then basically two weeks became 2 years. And then we were able to sign up something like 750 theaters.
So it's a success story up until this point.
I mean, the company's still running. It's doing okay. I got a lot of credit for building the company up to, where it is today. And it was a happy story, except for the part that I got fired.
Yeah, let's talk about that part.
So as the company grew, I guess, my partner, Sean, and I, we didn't see a lot of things eye to eye. So a lot of it was related to, I guess, how we recruited. So, I mean, it was kind of interesting because I always wanted to hire the best and hire people that were more talented than me to kind of take our company to the next level. And I think he kind of had this opposite approach, which is very unorthodox. And, you know, I felt like we were kind of lacking the talent that we needed. So it was just kind of this ongoing thing. Other co-founders kind of disagreed with that approach as well. And then they ended up leaving. And, you know, long story short, I talked to some investors about it, and they kind of start to agree, like, hey, you know, Kevin's kind of right about taking this different approach. And they wanted to go in a direction of setting up a board of directors. So it was actually Sean who started the company, and then I came a little bit later. So I never had a board officer seat. So when investors started to kind of, you know, see it from my perspective, he kind of felt like I was trying. He kind of felt threatened, and then I ended up getting fired from my own company. So if you want to know the details, I recommend reading my book about it. But that's kind of like the gist behind what had happened. And it was unfortunate because, you know, he was one of my best friends. We actually did the network marketing business together going back 13, 14 years. And he was actually one of my first friends in America too. So it was painful in many ways. And at the same time, you know, getting fired from your company is almost a fascinating experience because you are disappointed in what happened, but you do realize that you are released from all the responsibilities from your previous stakeholders, customers, employees, and stuff like that. And it gives you a fresh start to look at things from a completely different perspective. And I remember when I got fired from my own company, I started like looking up like who else got fired from their company? Like, what's it feel like? Am I supposed to feel this way or that way, or what should I do? Because I was like angry yet happy, or, you know, all these weird emotions just kind of were so chaotic, but it was like they just canceled one another. And that's when I started to write my book, because I kind of wanted to capture all those emotions as I wrote. And then going back to my story of perfecting English, back then, because my English wasn't that great, I started to write a journal, and I wrote it for about 16 years. So I finally had the time to read like 1,000 or 1,200 pages of my journal, which, you know, took a while to read. And I would just kind of like, wow, laugh and cry. I'm like, wow, I never knew, you know, I could become an American and all that kind of stuff. It was a fascinating time to kind of have that time to just kind of tune out and reevaluate a lot of things.
So you bounced back. Obviously, being fired from any job is horrible, especially being fired from a job in a company that you helped build. It must not have been great, like you mentioned, right? But here you are. You bounced back. You decided to take some time and write the Outlier Approach. Let's talk about the book, what it's about, who it's for, and why we should care.
Sure. So I, you know, when I was living in a van for 2 years, I knew I was young. I started Dealflicks when I was 26, 27, and I knew a lot of entrepreneurs that had a lot more experience than me. It was my first time really, you know, rolling my sleeves up and just becoming like a full throttle entrepreneur. And I read a ton of books during this time because there's a lot of downtime to think, you know, you're in a van, there's no TV and stuff like that. And, you know, you're listening to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks. And after about 20 or 30 books, they all kind of bleeded into one another. They all all these best-selling books sounded more or less the same with very similar examples. And I was getting a very low ROI reading these books because I was hoping, man, if I read 50 books, maybe that's like 2 years worth of experience. And I realized that just started not kind of be the case. And I realized, you know, a lot of business books had people, you know, kind of from the same background or, you know, similar work experiences and whatnot. And I wanted to write a book that was for someone maybe similar to my background. So if you look at my background, I had parents that had no idea how America worked. I had to Americanize myself. I had no connections in Wall Street. I had no connections in Silicon Valley, no connections in Hollywood. No connections in journalism. And by the age of 32, I've worked in all those industries, and, you know, I lived to tell the tale about it in my book, basically. Right. And sometimes we get confused with the way media portrays success. Like, you have to be a super connector. You have to go to certain schools. You have to learn coding to start a tech company. I had none of the above, basically. And what's so interesting is that I think the real world is kind of like dating, like in high school. So, there's this popular girl at school. You really want to get to know her. And all of a sudden, some random guy kind of like comes from a different school and shows up. And then she just swoons over to him. And there's this whole philosophy that I believe that you could be the dark horse, the candidate that comes out of nowhere, and be able to achieve what you want. And similar, again, to that high school dating analogy, is that sometimes when you use a connection or use a friend, use an intro and whatnot, it's kind of like telling that girl that you like her, but through a friend. So you can use a completely different angle to really get what you want. And I talk about these strategies in my book. I call it social arbitrage. I talk about staying away from the frenemy zone. I talk about the difference between a vertical network and a horizontal network, which are some of the terms I kind of like summarized in my journals before I wrote this book, to help me get a really good ROI on all the business partnerships and stuff that I've been doing. So I think it's a book that's completely a different angle when it looks at business. And also throughout the book, it's about a 300-page book. So I go back and forth between my Korean identity and an American identity. And towards the end of the book, I kind of merge those identities into one. So it's kind of like, an American is an immigrant and immigrant is an American. And I try to paint the American dream in today's world in both the eyes of a foreigner as well as a native, because I think the American entrepreneurial spirit is very original, and our country is built from like nonconformists. And sometimes we don't really stay true to those values as much as we should. And when I was a kid, the first thing I realized when I moved back to Korea, like kids would make fun of you saying, you're stupid, you're retard, because so much value was placed on intellectual ability. If you look at, it's the Star Spangled Banner, we talk about, home of the brave. When I was in Minnesota as a small kid, the worst thing you can get teased is like a coward or a chicken. Mm-hmm. Our society is built so much on bravery. And we kind of forget those values. So I wanted to kind of paint a global perspective, but maintain that American entrepreneurial spirit throughout the book by writing it.
One of the things that you talk about, one of the terms that you kind of use is something that we need to understand how to create social spread. Talk to us a little bit about that. What is that?
Yeah. So basically, if you look at, Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Outliers, I love his book, by the way. He talks about how, a guy like Paul Revere was able to inform, the whole town and suburbs of Boston on how the British are coming and how he was well connected. He was like a hunter, a frequent pub goer, like a poet, all these kinds of things. And, society kind of values these connectors to build businesses. Well, the way I look at it is that there's a difference between building your own network but also versus having access to a network you can have without having to maintain it. So the idea behind it is, wait, what if instead of maintaining 1,000 people, let's say, right, in your network to kind of, do business deals or, do PR or do marketing, whatever you need to do. Instead of maintaining 1,000 people, you were able to just maintain a relationship with 10 super connectors. So you can delegate almost networking for them. So then basically you can save a tremendous amount of time and resources to be able to do what you need to focus on. So that's kind of one of the concepts behind creating a social spread. And another concept that I want to go on talk about is that when I was first starting Dealflicks, we didn't have a functioning website, we didn't have a programmer, and we didn't have any media coverage. So what I did was I went to a potential programmer and I said, hey, we're going to be on the news. And I told the news outlet, we're going to sign up a theater. And I told the theater, hey, we're going to get a website. We had none of the above. So I sold 3 ideas to one of them. And within 1 month, they all signed up thinking that we all had one or the other. And then I was able to create 3 or 4 things out of nothing. Because all the other, components or the other, like necessities I needed to launch this business had what one thing needed and not the other thing that needed. So I was able to put the pieces together to sell the idea without having, a single bird in the hand, basically, to speak. So.
Yes, funny how when one thing falls into place, or at least is assumed that it's going to fall into place, everything else seems to kind of follow right after, and so it makes it a little bit easier. You get the snowball effect, right?
Right. Exactly.
Now, with the book, right, with the experiences that you've had, what does your day to day look like right now? You finished the book. It's pre-launch time. You haven't fully released it yet. So, what does all this look like right now for you?
Yeah, so it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of interesting work. So today, I have a meeting with one of the companies that I'm advising. I'm giving them a sales strategy on how to, sign up all these movie theaters, in the movie industry. But then I also am representing a company called Film Journal. They have a niche magazine for everything that's going on in the movie industry. So I'm designing interesting topics to cover in the movie industry. I'm also on spring break, so I'm trying to, I'm taking some coding classes to learn, how to code and whatnot. So it's a lot of fun. I kind of designed, after I got fired from my company, I kind of looked at my career like a portfolio, like a money manager would. So I just, allocate and reallocate resources as if they're stocks in my portfolio. And then I would invest more time and money into whatever part of my career is doing really well at that time. So right now my book is doing really well. So I'll say about 60 to 70% on my focus is on my book launch, and then 20 to 30% is focused towards advising, and then 10%, whatever remains, is focused on school. So I'm always behind on my homework.
Oh, that's okay. All right. So now when we have you back on the show in 3 years, right, what are we going to be talking about?
Well, that's a really good question. I think in about 3 years, I kind of focus more on advising and consulting and whatnot. Hopefully I'll have my MBA by then, because at the rate I'm going, I'm just, taking it extremely slow. But I'm also thinking about working on my second book. I think people are really enjoying the first book, and I have, a couple of really great ideas for my second book. And I love writing about other people as well, and kind of uncovering their stories and talking about other outliers in my book. I interviewed some fascinating people in my book, such as, CEO of Udemy, Kevin Johnson. I also interviewed the guys behind the guys behind Gangnam Style, and how the main manager for Psy actually partnered with Justin Bieber's manager to help it go viral, and
Cool.
just kind of uncovering those stories. So fascinating. So I would love to work on another book, but also, advise a lot of companies at the same time.
And so let's, as we start to kind of wrap this up a little bit, let's talk about the single biggest reason for your success up until this point.
I think I never am too high or too low, whether I succeed or fail. And it's kind of like that trader's mindset that I learned during the Great Recession. And it was so crazy because, clients were just crying all the time. These old retired guys in their 50s, 60s, and 70s are crying and talking about suicide. It was nuts. And you have to be even keeled, because you're placing a trade under those conditions while the market's like fluctuating, 5% a day within the hour sometimes. And I learned how quickly money can come and go. I learned success can disappear in seconds. And whatever I did since then, I never took each day for granted. I'm like, well, anything I can have, anything I have today could collapse tomorrow without me expecting it. So I always had that trader's mindset. And on the flip side, things could just turn around completely, like what would happen when I got fired from my own company. It became the best career decision of my life, even though it wasn't even my decision. So just kind of being even keeled, and just kind of like having an old soul but a young heart type of mindset. You still don't want to lose your passion, and just kind of keep going and taking it day by day, I think has been really helpful for me.
I love it. We're fans. We're definitely going to pick up the book. We're going to share the book with all of our networks. So congratulations on the book, on your success, on the things that you're doing right now. You're living the outlier life, and don't ever stop, right? We're going to continue to follow you throughout the entire journey, throughout the process, and we're going to be cheering you on from the sidelines. So again, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ever. Really, really appreciate you having me, and hope to stay in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, tell us where we can find you online, the book, right? Those who want to connect with you, where can we find you?
Yeah, so right now you can get it on Amazon. The official launch date is March 27th, but you could get it pre-sale. I made it 99 cents for now because I'm a first-time author, but it's already a bestseller under multiple categories, which I'm really excited about. The paperback's available as well for pre-order, and the audiobook will be coming out pretty soon. I also launched, or in the process of almost completing launching my website called askkevinhong.com. So if you're an executive or a, I guess like entrepreneur, or anyone that's kind of trying to navigate through the corporate world, I provide the most unorthodox, nonconformist approach from anything from getting a raise, negotiating salary and whatnot, to recruiting technical co-founders, to living in a van. Whatever you need, I provide the most outlandish advice. So if you want to listen, feel free to find me at askkevinhong.com as well.
I love it. So Outliers, you can go to outlierhq.com. That's outlierhq.com. First of all, subscribe to our podcast, rate, review it, share it with your friends. But there we're going to have links to Kevin's websites, social media accounts, to the books. Feel free to reach out to him. He's the real deal. He's doing some amazing things. And pick up the book for sure. We're going to have a link to that as well. So again, Kevin, it's been amazing. Thank you for being on the show, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks, Ever. Really appreciate it.
Outliers, we'll talk to you tomorrow.